doing that, I was face to face with it. It was holding me by my throat, and it felt like it was sucking something out of me.
I probably should have been more scared than I was when I witnessed the exorcism.
I turned and looked on my right side. When I did, there's a beam on the side of the tree, a large beam. It's looking at me and I'm looking at it.
After I hit the lock button and looked back up, I saw red eyes staring back at me.
That they're going to show multiple gods all over the earth, be able to speak in people's languages, and at that point, it kind of converge into this one entity, which will be revealed as extraterrestrial. You'll realize that aliens are the gods of old, and at that point, it'll wipe religion out of the context of humanity.
No, it couldn't have been a person, I know that. I know that people can't run through the woods like that.
So this thing comes into view, and I see it. It's 50 yards away from me. It's walking on two legs. It's huge. This is a big, hairy-looking being.
Welcome. I'm your host, and this is uNcomfortable. Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you have had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it featured on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your experience. They want to hear your stories. So please get a hold of me and let's get yours on a future episode of Uncomfortable. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And please remember to leave us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you can. That's the main way you, the listener, can help get this show out in front of more people. And with more people listening, that means more people coming forward with their experiences, like tonight's two gentlemen. Also, for those of you that might be looking for a little bit of a change of pace, head over to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube and hit subscribe and the notification bell and all the other things that you hit and subscribe to. And that way you're going to be made aware every time I upload a version of the podcast in video format. I'm doing that on a regular basis now. If you're interested in helping support the show, head over to patreon.com/uncomfortablepodcast770 and check out the 3 levels we have there. See if anything appeals to you. Or if a standalone contribution is more to your liking, you can do that as well through the red circle sponsor this podcast link. Both of those links will be in the show notes below. September 14th, 2024. That's the date for Bigfoot and Brews and Spirits 2. Again, being held within the confines of Sister Lakes Brewing Company in Dowagiac, Michigan. We've already got Ohio's Amy Boo. She is part of the Olympic Project and her own project called Project Zoo Book. Also, on the paranormal side of things, we're going to change it up a little bit this year, and we're going to have a special guest speaker, and that will be the listener favorite, the Archbishop Christina Rake. I'm in talks with several other presenters to get them out there for you for your Bigfoot edification. I'll make you aware as I'm hoping to have a lineup solidified by the end of January, 1st of February. Tickets should go on sale soon after that. I will let you know when everything is ready to be viewed on the Uncomfortable Podcast website. As for tonight's show, if you listen to one of the most recent episodes where I did the email grab bag, you will have heard these gentlemen's email story I got from Keith. And when I read it, some very interesting things. And the reason it strikes me is because they are some things that are very similar to some experiences that I had during a kayak trip in the Huron-Manistee National Forest. And so I was really hoping to be able to get these guys on. It was a little bit of a chore trying to find a day where we could all three of us get together, but we finally did it. And if you would, let's give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Keith and Tim. Gentlemen, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you here, guys. A little bit of transparency here. Keith
actually works with my son at the same company, and found the podcast through my son. Thanks, Jake, for that. Got to have my kids pimping out my podcast to people. But nice conversation via email, and interesting stuff. So, if you would, let's get into it, and just kind of let's start from the beginning. Tell me about the day. Tell me about what was what it was like going in, and what you may have, looking back on it now, having had a chance to think about it. Any other additional strange things that might have popped into your head after initially talking about this?
You can start if you'd like, Keith.
Okay. Yeah, so what is Leelanau County? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, it's right up in Glen Arbor, essentially.
Yeah, so we hunt off state land, take a 2-track back to where we hunt. We've hunted there. I mean, you guys have hunted there for 25 years or so, or maybe more. I've hunted there several times with Dad and those guys, but we're driving back on the 2-track. Someone was in our initial spot we were going to take, so we drove up the track a little bit further, parked, and man, the first thing we noticed is Dad was walking up the track. I don't know if I said it in the email, but a big old, what looked like wolf tracks walking down the 2-track. There's obviously no wolves in the Lower Peninsula, but that thing was bigger. It was as big as our palms, just walking down the track. Yeah. So Dad, that was the first thing that was a little odd, I'd say.
And the road that Keith's talking about it's a seasonal road, so it's got access on the lower part. So this part of, I think it's still in the Manistee National Forest, there's just lots and lots of hills. So where we enter it is at a very low point, and it's very hilly terrain all the way up to the top of the hill, which is quite a ways up, and there's a smattering of houses up at the top. So where Keith's talking about is we're on what I would call like the lower portion of the property, and he's right. We've been hunting there. I'm mid-40s, and I started gun hunting there when I was first able to. So same piece of property essentially.
So you guys have been on this property for the better part of your young adult through current times. I mean, this place is no strange. It's not strange to you at all.
No, and so to provide a date for that too. So we got up there the day before. So when we were scouting our spot, and what Keith's explaining is November 14th. So the day before opening season.
Yep. So we found a spot. I think we hunted there 2 years ago too, or something. We don't really see much deer there, but we saw a deer there the 2 years before. So we're like, hey, this is the spot. Because I think last year we saw buck kiss for deer. It was like, all right, we know there we saw one deer here. So we went back there. You can still kind of see the road from where we even put the blind, but walk back there. Dad stayed at the truck. Timmy and I set up the blind. He cut down some branches for for shooting alleys and whatnot, and just a kind of a 2-man blind. You set it down there, and it's one of the pop-up blinds, so you push basically like 4 spokes up on all 4 sides, and then
I have one.
Yeah, so that was kind of the context of where we're at, and then man, we hunted the first day, and we didn't have anything, and then
so we sit side by side. There's enough room in there for us, a little table for some of our gear like binoculars and whatnot.
Yeah.
Cribbage board.
We sat there from, what's that?
Cribbage board.
Yeah, there's also that. But yeah, we sat there all day, and nothing. I wouldn't say anything out of the ordinary happened that day. I mean, not a whole lot. Well,
so you guys are you're in it early, out there just all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. First day we sat all day. So you're there from dark until dark. And then I guess to preface this too, like I said, I started listening to your podcast. Never really thought anything about Bigfoot or anything. And then as we're heading up, I was kind of asking Dad, like, you spent your whole life in the woods. You always say you only spend a few days here and there, but like Dad's been hunting since he was in diapers. And I'm like, have you ever had any tree knocks? You ever had any of this? You ever smelt something funky? And I'm saying all these things, and I'm like, these guys think I'm crazy. And then the next day, we caught about 5 of the things I was talking about.
So, like, when you brought that up with your dad, what was his reaction to you? Was it the typical roll in his eyes and now you're friggin' nuts, or did he entertain it?
I wouldn't say Dad dismissed it. I think he just would say nothing. He would be more in the camp of, if he did, he couldn't recall it, but he didn't just dismiss it. He said, I don't think I've really had any of those things. But I mean, like, once we get into what we heard, I could say I've heard some of those things before. It just never, without Keith kind of walking over all that ground that he was telling us about.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said, I just said it was that thing, but no, like, I would give no attribute to what caused it.
It's funny that you say that, because I've got a good friend of mine, Rob. He hunts all the time. All right. And again, it's like, he's been hunting since he's been a little kid, but that doesn't mean you're out in the woods 365 days, but he is very proactive. He's out there setting up cameras. He's clearing firing lanes and, the properties that they lease and everything. So, he's out there a lot. And, when I first started talking about this stuff, and it was even prior to me doing the podcast, he would look at me like I was nuts. He's like, there ain't nothing out there. I've been out there all the time and there ain't nothing. And, at the time, for me anyway, even though I always believed Bigfoot was a legitimate and very likely thing, I always thought that, in the dark recesses of British Columbia, in the upper Pacific Northwest, it seemed like a problem that was relegated far from southern Michigan.
Yeah, it's nowhere local, right? It's in
Right.
some dangerous different region.
Yeah. And ever since, he's started listening to the show, and God love him, he's become very a good fan of the show. But I can't tell you how many times now over the past couple of hunting seasons where he'll take pictures, or he'll send me a picture off of his trail cam, or he'll be like, man, and he recorded some sounds. And I mean, there are some strange sounds out in the woods, and a dog howling in a neighborhood that carries through woods is going to sound way different to a hunter sitting out there alone when that sound is traveling a long distance, rather than you being in the house next door to that dog that's barking and annoying the hell out of you. It's going to have a different sound to it, a different tonal quality. So even he, with as much as he was like, nah, there ain't nothing like that out there. It's in his head now. And when he's out there and he's hearing these things, or he's walking by and he sees something that looks like it would have been picked up and put there, on purpose, like twigs or like a structure or something, he's always talking to me about it, and I wonder, like in the case of your dad was never made aware of any of the things that are supposedly peripheral sounds and things that, typically people report having around them when they're in the area of these things. Had he been aware of those, and much like yourself, now, next year when you go out hunting, I'm guessing that those are kind of going to be in the forefront of your mind as far as you're going to be listening for it. Well, and did that sound just like what I heard last year? Or
yeah, and the interesting dynamic we have in the tent is Keith's hearing is trash. He's got I don't know, is it your right ear, your left ear that just doesn't simply work?
Yeah, my left ear.
And my hearing is my hearing is good, right? So like, he's telling us about on the drive up, he's saying, I've listened to this podcast and there's all these things we could be aware of.
Yeah.
And I was dismissive. I mean, I didn't have any belief, but it in the email, and I now know that you've read it, like that first thing about the crow was or the bird, it was different, right? Like, and I'm not a bird call master, and I can identify some backyard birds, but it just sounded strange, and I was like, dude, are you hearing this? Because I know that. What one is it, Keith?
I can't hear shit out of my left one, and my right one's just as bad.
Right, and so the first day I was sitting on your
You're
left
sitting on my
side,
left.
right? Because you were on, yeah. So I was like, are you hearing this?
Yeah, so he'd hit me in the knee. Anytime there's anything we're hunting, he's like, hey, did you hear that? And I'm like, no. But then, hey, are you hearing this? Like, well, yeah, I hear this bird sounding like it shouldn't. I mean, it's trying to sound like it's trying to sound like a crow.
So go into that. Let's talk about what were you hearing and what was so odd about it?
I honestly, I don't have like the best recollection of that particular one. The other three I do, so I'd have to rely on Keith on that. But I know, like, when we're sitting together, it's an experience for us to be together, to spend the time out there too. But like, part of hunting when you're not seeing things, or even the whole topic we're discussing is like part of it is auditory, and he doesn't really have that. So like, you're listening for the of a deer walking through or something like that. So when I was hearing that, I'm like, that just sounds strange, but I don't have the full recollection of that. So I'll have to rely on Keith to explain that one.
Yeah, I just remember he's asking, and I'm like, yeah, I hear it. And it's like, you hear the crow saying caw or whatever, and this thing was actually like, caw. It was like, it sounded like something that we wanted, like my wife and I yelled at our kids caw to like call them in the store if they're, like going around or something. Yeah. And it really sounded like someone just trying to mimic what you think a crow would sound like, not like an actual crow cawing.
And it's a really interesting thing because, imitation is something that a lot of people talk about, these beings or creatures. I tend to think that they're probably closer to us and more of a leftover type of human than being what some people consider them to be, actual apes, undiscovered apes. I think because of my love for the Native American oral traditions of what they've handed down about these things throughout their existence, everything leads me to believe that these are more of a people, a lost brother. And, before we started recording, I was telling you about my kayak trip in the Huron Manistee a few years back. And we, our first day we were done, we set up camp, we had a fire going. One guy was just drinking to beat Jesus, man. He couldn't get enough beer in him. And me and the other guy, we were just kind of sitting out, hanging out and enjoying nature, and from across the river, we hear this weird owl sound that was kind of like, roar, and it was like, what the fuck is that? And, John says, I think he said it's barred owl. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. And the interesting thing about it was we had it happening from across the river. My guess was probably parallel to where we were at. So like directly across the river. And then you would hear one that was way off behind us, back down the river, considerably farther away, you could tell. And then you'd hear one that was considerably further up. And it always went in that same pattern. You heard the one across, you heard the one behind, you heard the one ahead. You hear the one across, the one behind, the one ahead. And that went on for quite a while. And we ended up, I finally said, all right, everybody just be quiet. And I pulled out my phone and I hit my recorder, my voice recorder on it. And I got a I got, probably 2 or 3 minutes of it doing repeatedly. And the guy that was drinking, he was like, he got up, took a piss, came back, opened up another beer, and then he was like, no, I'm done. And he went and he got in his hammock. And so then it was and he had just put a log on the fire. So, then John and I look at each other and we're like, oh, shit, man, we got to stay here till this thing burns down now, And it's what really struck me as weird is once he left and went to go get into his hammock, then we heard tree knocks. But it was 2. Whack, 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 a few minutes apart. And the rest of the night was the night from hell because it was, I bought a bunch of stuff off of Amazon as far as going on this trip. I bought a 2-man hammock. It was, I don't know in what part of the world 2 human beings could have fit in that. I could barely fit my ass in that thing. I sat down in it. I flipped out backwards, tore the mosquito net out. The rain tarp was 2 feet too short. There was no way it was either going to cover my head and not my feet or my feet and not my head. I had the foil packets of the reconstituted food that you add boiling water to. My stomach was churning. I was like, it was a horrible night. And once we decided, the 2 of us, to go back to lay down, it was 5 minutes and I heard John snoring. And I was laying there and I start hearing splashes in the water. And like heavy splashes, like poosh, that when you take a big rock and you throw it in the water and you get that boop, and then you get the poosh of the water. I kept hearing it. And I'm like, okay, so, we're right next to the river. The river is running. So there's some ambient noise from the water moving anyway. I know fish are going to come up to the surface and get insects and whatever, but they're typically not like porpoising out of the water and doing a belly flop going back in to get an insect. They're coming up, they're breaking the surface of the water, they're getting their insect, and then they go back down. And I just kept hearing these big splooshes of water, and I'm like, what kind of water animal are there in the Huron-Manistee? You got beaver, I'm sure there's a couple of different things, but typically those things aren't jumping off of a tree trunk and doing swan dives and belly flops into the river. They're just coming down to the edge and they slide in and they take off. Right. So I'm like, now I'm thinking it's like, all right, when there were 3 of us sitting at the fire, we were hearing 3 owls that sounded off. It sounded like something making the sound try to be like an owl. And then once the other guy got back up, now we're hearing 2 tree knocks. And then I was like, there was only 2 of us at the fire. So if there was something sitting a distance away looking at us, at one point they would have seen 3 silhouettes. And that was during the time when we were hearing the 3 owls, right? Going forward, back, and ahead. Uh-huh. Then he gets up and goes, and now we're hearing 2 tree knocks. And each time it happens, it's 2. And now there's only 2 of us sitting at the fire. So if there's something looking at us, they're only seeing 2. So I'm like, I start thinking about that as a component of is that a component of their communication? Is that a way that they're like, okay, there's 3. And now there's 2, and I mean, by the time I got into my cot and put on every layer of clothing that I had brought with me because it got so goddamn cold and we weren't expecting it, I was literally laying there and I was afraid to go to sleep. I did not want to close my eyes and go to sleep. And I didn't want to get up and go 15 yards away from camp and dig a hole so I could do my business, because I knew that there was something out there that was going to be sitting behind a tree looking at me laughing, saying, look at the hairless monkey taking a dump in the hole. It wasn't until it started to get light, my guess was probably around 5:30 or so in the morning, that I was actually able to relax. And I ended up sleeping for about an hour and a half until the rain started. And, so that was a rough night. But I mean, after taking some time and thinking about it, it's like 3 hoots, there were 3 guys, 2 tree knocks, there were 2 guys, and then the splashes in the water that literally sounded like large rocks being thrown into the water.
I'd say what I find interesting about your story is the splashes, right? Because if you think of it, let's say it's a muskrat or a river otter or something like that, like they wouldn't want to be making that much. As I would think about, they wouldn't want to make that much noise because there's such larger predators, right? Like, why would they draw that much attention? So it would seem to reason that if something was making that amount of noise, there wasn't a lot of fear in that noise.
Yeah. It was very strange. It was a very strange night, and I mean, I'm okay with going into a haunted location and doing a ghost investigation, and I'll go sit down in a creepy ass basement in the dark with a couple of different ghost equipment, and I'm fine. I've had some bizarre experiences in my lifetime, and I'm fine. I was genuinely too afraid to go to sleep. So I made myself stay up.
That story too it's different than our story, but just with the river. So we have my wife's grandma has a cottage on the Au up in Grayling.
Yeah.
And not to get off our story, but just real quick, I wasn't there, but my wife and a couple of their buddies were up there sitting by a fire, and same thing. They heard the big old sploosh, 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 and they were like, "What the hell is that?" And they're all sitting by the fire, and they all got scared, and they were like, "That's a fucking bear. Let's run inside." And every time I've heard you tell that story before, and I'm just like, that's the same story my wife had, and like they all got nervous and said, "Let's get our asses inside."
Yeah. In that area of here on Manistee, there's some smaller bear in there. So was there a decent sized bear sitting on the shore just slapping water? I mean, I suppose it's possible, but the entire 3 days that we were there, I never saw a bear, and I never saw any sign of bear. So I mean, people can look at you and say, start throwing all these, well, it was probably this, or it was probably that, or it was probably this, or it was probably that. And, I'm like, yeah, it could be, but there was no sign of any of that.
Right.
So what else what's it going to be then? And I guess they could say, well, there was no sign of Bigfoot either. That wasn't necessarily true. If you would happen to go back to the Instagram post of when I talked about that experience, there was a very large, significant tree structure that, as we were coming around one of the curves in the river, it was right off to my left hand side, and man, I'm telling you, it was blatantly obvious that you had one tree standing straight up. You had tree on either side of it like this, another couple that were on like this. So it was like a starburst out of dead tree logs. And luckily I was able to get my camera out and take a picture of it. And it's like that, to me, that was significant, because whatever moved those trees, those were big, and it just did not look like anything that would have happened naturally. I suppose it could have, you can't ever say never, but it was bizarre.
The only thing actually notable, Keith, it was the first afternoon towards the end at about 4 o'clock where you split out of the tent to go like 30 yards behind me and just get a different perspective for the day. And I did have it's a whitetail experience, and I'm giving the context because it provides like a visual and an auditory portion to what we're talking about, where like I heard something coming in, let's say 40 yards or less. And so as I'm sitting, that would be to what would be my left. And just to my left outside our tent was like a small rise, a little bit of a hill, and then I went back flat, and it ended up being a buck. And in the most traditional buck story, like it ran 60 yards in front of me, stopped, and I could see his tail, his back, left leg, and then just antlers coming from around a tree. And then it ran off, and I never saw it again. Like Keith didn't see it, but also he didn't hear it. So, and why we're saying that, because I think that leads us into the second one was the mid-morning, and that was the scratching sound that we heard, right?
That was, I think we heard the tree knock, the second thing.
Okay, it was the tree knock was next.
So to put that in context too, it was windier than hell out there too. So, we're sitting in this, and Timmy a few years back was out there with Dad when it was real windy, and trees actually started falling down around them, so they had to book ass and get out of there. And so now I'm like, shit, man, this is windy. We're sitting in this, you can't really look up. And, you can tell the difference between, what we heard and trees, rustling together. Obviously, the trees are hitting each other. There's pine trees rustling. And,
rubbing, yeah.
Yep. All of a sudden to our right, boom. And I'm not sitting here. We both look at each other, and I go, fucking tree knock, bro. Because, like, I've been telling them all these things, and I'm just like, you got to be shitting me. Because it was something. Go ahead.
It was substantial because it didn't just knock, but it, like, knocked with such... It felt like it knocked with such force that it, like, resonated, too. Like, I would equate if you had a baseball bat and you hit something solid, it just knocked so hard. And, when you're sitting out there hunting and you're with your brother, we're kind of just chit-chatting, and he was talking about all this stuff, and it was like that was exactly what you're talking about. That was a fucking knock. And it was substantial. Right? The story Keith's talking about the trees is I was up a couple years ago with my dad, and it was, somewhat warmer weather, and the ground was wet, and the wind was really whipping. And we had a full-size oak tree, just like you heard the roots explode with a loud crack, and that sucker fell, and we just like blasted out of the tent. So you know what a tree falling in the woods sounds like now. And then this was just totally different because it actually, like, if you were to describe it as you heard it, you heard knock, like just this thud of a knock that just resonated. And we were just like, that was serious. That didn't sound like anything that we would say if you heard a limb break or a tree fall or anything. It sounded so much different like that. It just sounded like full force of a smack against another solid surface with a very solid object.
See, and that's the interesting thing about a tree knock when you hear a tree knock, because it literally sounds like if you had two old-fashioned hardwood baseball bats.
Yes, that's
what
I have in my brain.
The most positive smack you could possibly do. I defy you to go out in the woods, find a limb, even a heavy limb that's on the ground, and then smack a tree with it and get that same sound.
Right, you get a crack,
and do it.
Get the knock. You're right.
Yeah, you can't do it.
And there's so many trees, like trees have their bark, right? And the bat doesn't have any sort of like what I would call like a cushion on it, right? So it had to be two like very solid surfaces come together. And so Keith, when we were sitting there, if we're facing out, that was off to, it would have been to our,
like good ear,
where you were right on our right-hand side. I can't, it's hard. It would be hard to explain how far away it was, but it was loud enough for us to say like that seemed close because it was so loud. It almost was like you felt it, or at least, I know Keith's hearing's not as good as mine, but like I think that tells you that even with half an ear, he heard this thing.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about the sound of a tree knock, and I've talked about this on other episodes, and this kind of gets into the woo aspects of it that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but the frequencies and vibrations are everything on this earth, you, me, everything, the table I'm sitting in front of, there's all a vibration, there's all a frequency to everything. And it, if you go investigate a haunted house, a lot of times you're going to hear a knock on the wall. You think it's on the wall. But, when Bigfoot is around, you hear tree knocks. Well, what if that's not necessarily them picking up a limb and smacking the tree with it? What if that is part of them coming into our perception? What if that's a peripheral effect of when they come into our perception and we become aware of them? I don't know. I don't think Bigfoot are golden retrievers for the aliens when they come, but there's a lot of people that report seeing lights in the woods, orbs that are moving around when either prior or post having a Bigfoot experience. And it's like, maybe this sound, because it's so odd that you can't just go grab something, and I don't know that anybody has ever reported seeing a Bigfoot with a big ass limb or something in their hand hitting a tree, making the sound. It's always, you hear it, but what is making that noise? And that really makes me wonder if everything, ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot and everything, is it possible that these things are all coming from a different plane of existence that we aren't readily able to see? That's really getting in way far deeper than a couple of hunters need to with some weird experiences in the woods. But those.
I would also say what I find notable, like if you take the baseball analogy, right? Like a baseball bat, if you were to hit it against something, it makes that crack or that thud, but we didn't hear anything like break or snap or anything associated with it. It was just that solid connection. And so it's like if you're saying Bigfoot was swinging a huge branch or something, there was no like smashing, no like squishing, no nothing. It just was that knock. So
that
I can't dispute whatever you're talking about that, other than we heard it so substantially and both of us had the exact same experience with it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's just a very strange thing. They dumb it. I don't think they do it intentionally, but I feel that it's an experience that is significantly dumbed down by calling it a tree knock. I understand that that's what it sounds like, but we don't have any kind of evidence to suggest that that's actually what's happening, that they're picking up a big ass log or tree limb and, swinging for the fences against another thing. Because, if you were to take a large limb and swing it as hard as you could against a tree, where it makes contact with the tree, any part of that limb that's hanging out past the tree is going to snap off because of the inertia of being stopped by the tree, and it's just going to break off and it's going to snap. And like you said, you don't hear that part.
No.
It probably leaves a big ass dent in the tree too, though. How hard it sounds, And
yeah.
Many dents in the trees. I don't know.
Yeah. It's notable, right? I mean, it fits the things Keith was describing, and again, I was just kind of like playful about it. And then you hear stuff like that. Like, you can't say it's not.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about it.
Well, you're in a forest, and it's windy. You hear trees rubbing together. You hear that squeaky sound that the bark makes when it's rubbing against another tree. there's all kinds of the leaves rustling. You can hear, when the wind comes through, all of a sudden you hear the extra noise of the leaves all moving around in the trees. There's all kinds of sounds out there.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that readily replicates that noise.
Yeah, we didn't hear that. We only heard the noise one time, and it was like it was windier and shit. And that one time we heard that, out of
That's exactly what I was just going to say. You heard the ambience of the forest, right, Eric? All the things you're describing, and then we had that one notable experience, and that was it. Like, you could hear branches kind of crackling together and whatnot, but like that one stood out as just completely different than everything we were experiencing in the 2.5 days we were there.
And it stood out far enough to
like normal forest activity.
Say tree knock, after I just been blabbering about all the stuff all the stuff we could hear, and it's like if you had a checklist, it's like, all right, there's one, here's another one, and Timmy's like, I can't fucking dispute that, man. Like that was all the shit you're talking about.
We can talk about this after we're recording, but that checklist, right? That checklist that you're talking about, it's like you start marking things off. I don't know if you've ever talked with Jake about his experience up in Petoskey.
I just heard his episode, when I listened to your show, but a little bit.
So, when he called me and tells me, I'm all right, he texted me. He's like, I'm okay, but a tree just got pushed over beside me. And I was like, what? And he sends me a picture of this tree, and I mean, it was a pretty sizable tree, and root ball and everything out of the ground and laying across the path. And then, he tells me they move on, whatever another 100 yards to do the next, boring. And, one of the drillers turns around and says, hey, is that somebody's phone going off? Like, is that Siri talking or whatever? And Jake says, I'm hearing it, and it sounds like either a woman or a kid's muffled voice in the woods, which is something you hear I can't even tell you how many times I've hearing a muffled female voice or a little kid's voice in the woods. And all three of them heard it. And then when they moved back to the last boring site, they turned back around because there's all this, the underbrush and everything is being shook really violently, but way back where the tree was pushed over.
Yeah.
So, and he's telling me this, and I'm like, dude, I know you would not pull my leg about this stuff because I take it so seriously, but you realize you're putting check marks in boxes that is like, it's textbook. And he's like, I know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Tell him about that next one, Keith. Cause this one, it feels like our progression gets even more like, holy shit,
It definitely ramped up, but one we didn't even add though is like right in front of us, which we due to the wind, but we had a tree fall down. We didn't see it, but off in front of us to the right, all of a sudden you hear the crack and and you hear the tree fall, and it's like, then I started worrying like, shit, Timmy, we're gonna have to run out of the woods like you and Dad did, but we never equated that to anything weird. It was just, okay, that was the wind, But now thinking about
you've been out in the woods for a lot of your lives. How many times have you heard a tree fall?
Well, I can tell you one time I saw one that was probably like, this big, around 80 feet tall, fall right in front of me, and I about shit my pants and basically picked up my dad and ran out of there because, something like that, there's no overcoming when it comes at you, right? Like we saw that, and I honestly, Keith, I forgot about that, but we did hear one fall. But like for me, seeing one fall, it's like, okay, I can equate that to like a natural happenstance, right? But that,
I had one fall in my backyard. It was, 3 foot around. I was driving down 28th Street and it said wind advisory. I came home looked out the back deck, and I watched this thing absolutely just, it's a 100-foot tall tree, just crush my back fence. And I was like, son of a bitch, I need to call insurance. But I think that's the only tree I've ever heard fall besides this one when we're in the woods, like you're saying. Like, it's not very often you're out in the woods,
Right.
Besides, and hopefully Ma doesn't listen to it, because I don't think Timmy's ever told Ma that he had to carry Dad out of the woods.
No, and I didn't tell Nora either. So I hope she doesn't listen to this either, because I told Keith, I was like, I wouldn't tell her that. That was too close.
Yeah, but the next one, progressively, like, we're just sitting there, we both have our rifles on us, so it's like, you don't feel scared or anything, it's whatever. And all of a sudden, off to my left, about at a 45, you hear, and I was like, something's coming down the tree, and whatever that is coming down the tree sounded fucking heavy, and it's like, I don't know what has those claws, but I mean, it was just four, I think it was four, it could have been three, but just, you can tell when something's got its claws in the bark, and I don't know how I could tell, but I could feel like it was coming, it was started up top and it was coming down, and I literally, I stuck my head out of the tent, and I was like, I don't see anything, but I mean, the sound of it was less than 30 yards away.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar, I hear it, right? And in my visual is something is gripping the tree, and it, like, either trying to get traction to start moving up, or like sliding down, because it was definitely scraping. And there's a lot of pine trees around there, like, if you could like pick the pine tree bark off and it'll kind of like make a chipping sound.
Yeah.
And like something substantial was like either getting traction going up or sliding down. But Keith was going like, is there a bear around here? Because it felt so substantial, not like a kitty cat or a squirrel, like kind of like it was.
It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't a porcupine. It was like that thing had some weight to it, and I was like, at the same time, where it's like it gets your heart pumping, because when you hear things in the woods, and we're like, all right, but it was like, that's not a small animal, and I'm like, and then I start questioning, like, do we fucking shoot a bear if it comes at us? Like, what are the rules here, But,
right, and when you're whitetail hunting, you're like tuning into whitetail activity. This thing was beyond whitetail activity. I mean, it had to be claws, because we don't know what else would be making that sound out there.
Right.
And it also sounded substantial, either moving up or down. I mean, to me, it sounded like something was sliding down, but it was unmistakable at that scratching sound. And Keith's right. It didn't sound like it was far away, but, part of where we are, we're right by Glen Lake, so most of the terrain like flows down to the lake. And I don't know if Keith, did you tell him, like, we're up near Inspiration Point, which is quite a high point right above Glen Lake. So you got Big Glen and Little Glen. So we're at we're near the middle of the terrain down from Inspiration Point. So we're up quite a ways, but the terrain, I mean, if you were to drive from the bottom of where we are to the top, it's a substantial climb, and there's just like straight hills going up. And where was I forget where I was going with all that, but
yeah, the thing was up above us for sure.
Oh, I know where I was going with that. Is the terrain around us like undulates, so you can't quite see over that little mountain. Like, for instance, when I was telling that story about the buck running around me, I could hear it, but it was like 20 30 yards over there around this little bump, and I saw it came around it. So like there was some undulating terrain in where we are. Like, we're in a flat opening with some trees in the center, like barely any trees. And the reason we picked it's because it's opening. There's forest all around us, hardwoods and softwoods. And then there's a bunch of shooting lanes, and we can see quite a ways away. But whatever this was, we could not see it, even though it wasn't that far away.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the scratching sound on the bark because some friends of mine that used to and hopefully still will put on the West Branch Bigfoot conference. This past not this year, but the year previous, I went up there and I hosted the town hall up there for them. And afterwards, they were doing a camp out, and they were going to go do an expedition. And Jake and I needed to get back to Grand Rapids, but I got some pictures sent my way, and they were in a laneway, where the electrical lines, the fire lane where the electrical lines go down, and there were telephone poles, and they were taking these pictures, and they were like 8 and 9 feet up off the ground, and you can tell the difference between a pole climber using spikes and how that goes into a pole and then leaves the little spurt sticking out. These were like legitimate claw marks, just digging out some of the wood out of these telephone poles, and they were 7, 8, and 9 foot high on the pole. And so what's out there? What's a lineman out there doing that's going to gouge a pole that literally looked like it had 3 or 4 nail marks just drawn across it? So what you're talking about, and that's the first thing that popped into my mind when I was reading the email was, I've heard about this. I never realized that they were walking by and whether that's their way of marking something, or it's a directional sign, or maybe a, hey, get the hell out of here, this is my area, to a rogue one or whatever. I don't know. But sounds very similar.
We definitely were on alert after that. I mean, there's no doubt about that, because I agreed with Keith. I'm like, it sounded so substantial. I could see this being a bear. And, he's like, do we shoot it? And I'm like, I mean, if we gotta, I don't know what the rules are, but I certainly aren't going to let this thing get unfriendly with me.
I'd rather pay a fine or have to explain myself than...
Yeah, but it was weird because, it didn't sound like it was far away. It just happened. I literally poked my head out of the blind, looked in that direction, and I was like, I don't see anything. And it didn't make a noise after that, but it was just, man, it was something, and it was loud and it was heavy.
Yeah, and if, part of my brain goes to whatever it was, for instance, let's say it was a bobcat sliding down a tree or something like that. If it was chasing prey, we didn't hear it like anything jump down and take off. It was the scratching and then just regular forest noise, no sounds of a chase, no calls, no nothing, just the scraping, and then it was regular. It's like, man, that was bizarre.
I gotta ask.
You figure something that you hear you perceive it to be so close, you'd think you'd see something happen, and we were just waiting for that for a while.
I gotta ask. I assume you haven't said anything about it, so I assume the answer is going to be no. But did you at any point try to find that tree to see if you could have seen claw marks or of something coming down that tree or not?
No,
there's so many trees out there, we wouldn't have known which one it was, or it would have been probably a good idea to go check, but no.
Next time.
Right. It also feels like the next one that was like the most holy moly of them all didn't happen too long after it, so it kind of changed our perspective. So if you want to cover that one too, because this one has us scratching our heads for sure.
Yeah, this one made me shit my pants damn near. So that's like, probably 15 minutes after that, we're you're just coming down. Every time you hear a noise out there, it's like it's something. So it's like your blood pressure goes up and it starts to come back down, and so at this point we figured I can't hear anything out of my right ear, so I sit on the left, so I'm on the left side this time, and we hear that. I pop my head out of the left side of the blind, come back, and man, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, so like I said, we're in this bind. You push these things out. They're spring activated, kind of. Something smacks the side of the tent, and the whole spring mechanism shoots in towards me. And I'm just like,
oh, no kidding.
I look at Timmy and I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, you shit your pants because all of a sudden the whole side of the tent is, it springs back the other way. And I was like, I said, what'd I tell you about them throwing rocks or sticks? And I stuck my head out of the tent and I looked on the ground. I was expecting to see, like here is a baseball. I didn't see anything on the ground. But I mean, we sat out there for that 3 days or something, 2.5 days. And, the tent could have given away at any point. And right after that claw, not 15 minutes later, the whole left side of the tent caves in. And it wasn't just caved in, like something hit it. You felt something hit the tent. So it sounded like, and boom, all of a sudden that thing was pushed in on me.
Yeah, the tent like shook and hopped. We both jumped. And like we're looking at it, and just like Keith described, you're like, somebody threw something at the tent. Because it did come in, and we're looking at it like looking outside because part of what Keith has been described is they'll throw a rock. Like, so we're out there looking for like a softball sized rock because it rocked the whole tent. And, I don't know what you look for if like what would have done it, but the way we perceived it, like we didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary, like a stick that seemed out of place, like it smacked it, but son of a bitch, that whole tent, man, it scared the shit out of us.
Oh, I bet.
That was probably about like 4:30.
That's what I was gonna say. Yep.
So you guys, you had a number of things in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah. All in that one day. I mean, that first day, I don't think we had anything notable, and everything we've discussed that would check that list all happened in that one day. From what 7? We were out there probably 7-ish, 7:05 when you're sitting down. And then, part of the stuff in the morning, and then the scratching in the tent was probably within less than an hour of it. Those two happened in the mid-afternoon. The tent one was hard to describe because it didn't seem like it didn't seem like the tent mechanically failed.
Right, because I was able to push it back out, like,
shit.
Everything worked back the way it was supposed to. But, like, I mean, those things are kind of hard to push out and get stuck. And it's, when you're trying to break it down, it's hard to push that in a little bit,
That's crazy. I'd have dropped a load. I'd have dropped a load too.
Oh, it happened right, like it literally happened, 6 inches from me because we're pushed up against the side. And I'm just like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure now that I'm kind of reliving it, I was like, what the hell was that? And like, we got guns in our, like, you're holding your gun in your hand. And like, what is messing with us? Because, my logical brain went right to like, how did the tent just fail when the whole structure is predicated upon tension? Like,
right.
How did it just all of a sudden spring in if it didn't break?
Right.
That was bizarre.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the only thing we can say is that whatever hit the tent wasn't a rock because we couldn't find a rock, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a limb or whatever the hell. I mean, we didn't find a rock.
Were there sizable limbs laying around? I mean, I would assume you're on the floor of a wooded area.
Yeah, not too far from us. There's branches down.
Is there anything you looked at that you were like, oh, well, all right, it must have been that?
No, when I stuck my head out, I was like, I didn't see anything that was just like, hey, here's like a piece that got thrown at it. It was just everything looked like should have been there.
I don't know if this will make sense, but it's kind of the way my brain works. It's like it wasn't so big that it would have destroyed the tent. So you're not looking for like a full on like oak log, right? Like you'd put in your fireplace. But it was big enough to push the tension in without destroying it or tearing the fabric And so when you're looking out there, you like have a visual of what size it should be. And
Right.
Eric, like you're saying, there's all kinds of, tree detritus on the ground, like, old branches from pine trees and stuff like that stuff's on the ground. So, but we didn't see anything like lying on the ground, moving like it had been jostled. It just was like, we don't know exactly what the ground looked like. So we can't say that, this branch over here wasn't part of what hit the tent, right? It was just so jarring that it happened. And it was with all the other stuff. And then the conversations about, Keith was saying, like, this is kind of what could happen out here. I'm like, we just fucking experienced it. We just did. That one was bizarre. I mean, the scratching one, you don't know, but like this one happened to something that was ours in the tent. And I don't believe it was a mechanical failure.
Yeah, to some extent, you guys had some control over that experience because it was surrounding you. You were within its confines, and there was no apparent reason for it to fail in any way, other than if something had pushed against the outside of it and made it pop in.
Right, and pushed hard, and like, I mean, it didn't make a noise before it. It wasn't like, hey, I'm really struggling here, I'm going to give way. It was just all of a sudden, very sudden, the side is just collapsing on me.
There was no snow, so there wasn't like tension on the roof to add pressure to the sides. I mean, it was cold, but no snow, no precipitation. And just out of nowhere, the whole tent just, bam, we jumped. Like, what the hell is that? And, we tried to look, but in the span of time of when it happened to when our shock wore off, I don't know if it was 2 seconds or a minute and a half to look out there and be like, what the fuck was that? What caused this? So, but it was definitely bizarre.
Was that the extent of the experiences then?
Yeah. Cause we finished out the night there with nothing else. We came back out the next morning, and then somebody had gone into my dad's blind and taken his chair. Because you could see his blind if you were driving around, you could see his blind. So somebody went in and took his chair, and
geez.
I don't know what you know about him, but it was a chair to make him comfortable while I was out there. And then we just ended up saying, like, all right, let's just call it if you can't be comfortable. So we didn't spend any more time in there. But yeah, the tent one, that was hard to explain.
The only other thing I'd say is, man, the year before, Timmy and I watched this spike horn come down from up top. And when we walked up there were so many goddamn trees down. I was just thinking about that when he said all the trees down. Like, we couldn't even walk through there. We're like, how the hell did that deer come from up there? Remember that? There was just, I don't know, 75 trees down up in that top spot.
Yeah, because the year before was that, the experience I told you about when it was kind of wet and windy up there when the one fell. So there were a lot of trees that fell. But like, even what Keith's describing about that button buck, that terrain up there was so hilly and so, I mean, like, I don't know how the deer walked through that. I mean, it was substantial just for us to hike our fat asses all the way up to that, let alone go, like, where'd he come from? Because you had to go down another big gully and up another huge hill. And so a lot of undulating terrain up there. So
you guys going into this, Keith, obviously you've listened to the show. I don't know what about your personality made you decide to start listening to that. Was it, do you have an interest in Bigfoot or paranormal or anything like that? Or did you just think it was cool? You work with a guy whose dad has a podcast, I'm going to check it out, and decided, do you like it?
Exactly. Yeah. I was just like, how sweet is that? Hey, your dad has a podcast. I'm going to check this out. And then I really got sucked in, and I'm more sucked in, I think, on the Bigfoot than the paranormal stuff, but it's all pretty good. But it was just, I mean, Timmy and Dad, and honest to God, all my friends, I just tell them, like, I got a bunch of dads that are friends of dads or hunters, and I'm like, hey, you ever seen Squatch? Here's what you're looking for. Have you heard this? Like, they got to be like, I don't know. I'm pretty far out there just in general, so I don't think they're, they don't really just shut me down. It's just like, hey, here's Keith talking some shit again. But like, I was like, hey, honestly, have you ever seen a Sasquatch? And, this guy is like, no, I never have, and, they don't dismiss me, I don't think. But, man,
But I guess,
yeah, go ahead.
I guess the point that I'm getting at is, between the two of you, with your own personalities, you were not going out there with the intent of, I hope we have a Bigfoot experience. You weren't looking for that. You weren't anticipating that. And you were going off of years of hunting experience with each other, that goes back a long way, and you've never noticed or experienced anything like it. Now that you have, and, there is some relatively good explanation for any of the things.
Exactly. Yep.
It was a crow with half a beak.
Yep.
It couldn't make the sounds right, or it was, a different type of bird that you weren't aware of. Maybe the tent was just pushed out just enough where it stayed stable for hours and hours and hours, but it was just on the verge of popping back in, and maybe it did it on itself. Maybe it was like, nope, I'm done. Fuck it. Boop. And he popped in. Maybe it was a big cat coming down the tree, maybe.
Uh-huh.
But when you put all those things together, and it all happens within a short span of time, then you're experiencing a number of different things in a short period of time that all tend to line up with things that other people have reported, and those, for me, if you ignore that, then I think you're doing a disservice to yourself, putting yourself in a position going out into the wilderness where there's wild animals and potentially these things that, for all we know, are wild and live by a completely different moral code than we do. And they're, the Native Americans have said in their oral tradition that, they were known as cannibals, so if they were, if they were taking, the one, Thomas Seawood I had on a couple of weeks ago, their oral traditions, when they were kids, they were told that the old lady of the woods would get you if you're behaving. And, it was a female Sasquatch that would carry a basket on its back and grab little kids, throw it in there, and then take it and, cook them up and eat them. So,
Sounds terrible.
Where did those stories come from? They had to come from something.
Uh-huh.
So, like where your head's at now with what you experienced on that day going into next hunting season.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I went into it obviously joking around with Sasquatch, like, hey, we're going to be out in the woods, and here's the things to look out for. And after it all said and done, like you said, everything can be explained away, I feel like. It's like, hey, here's a tree knock. Was it a tree hit another tree because of the wind? Was that really a cougar? Did the tent just fail? And, that maybe, I don't know. But, like, everything I think can be explained away, but at the same time, it's like, well, we didn't see a bear, We know what a tree sounds like when it actually falls. We know what a tree sounds like. I mean, we've all hit branches on trees trying to crack them and break them and this and that. And like you said, it's with an open mind. I think it's like, dude, we checked pretty good boxes, I'd say.
Yeah. My dog groomer, Joanna, her and her husband and their kids, they vacation up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And they were, I want to say they were around Pictured Rocks. I may be wrong. If I am, forgive me. But they went up to this lookout point, and, there was a group of people with them, and they were all standing up there looking out over the lake. And her husband heard tree knocks in the woods behind them. And to the point where he walked away from the rest of the group and was standing like at the edge of the tree line looking back into the woods because he was fully convinced that there was some kind of a construction crew back there that was building something because he kept hearing the knocks. But he said it wasn't like just hammering, repeatedly. You would just hear these loud wood knocks, and, they never saw anything. They did have an experience, though, that when they were on the trail, they heard, and it took her a long time, and she ended up messaging me, and she's like, "Oh my God, she heard something. I think it was on Sasquatch Chronicles where somebody described the growl, the guttural growl sound that they experienced as being like that of an alligator. It had that much resonance to it, like a big deep cavity that all that sound was resonating in." And there's no alligators or gators in northern Michigan, so what was that? They were on a trail. They would have easily been able to see a bear had it been in the area. They didn't see anything, but it scared them enough that they did an about face on the trail. And I believe the husband even pulled out the only thing he had, which was a pocket knife. And she was leading the kids back down the trail, and he was at the back of them and, had his pocket knife pulled because they were that frightened by the sound that they heard. What does that to people? You're walking through a hiking trail in northern Michigan. What could there be? Bear, yeah, but typically bear are big enough you're going to see them. What was going on? What was making that noise out in the woods?
I'll say, with the 4 distinct experiences we have, the first one, the bird, right? We're not bird experts. There could clearly be a bird making that noise that we just simply didn't know. Like, you know what a blue jay sounds like, and what a chickadee sounds like, and what a crow sounds like. This sounded different. It doesn't mean that there couldn't have been a different bird, but the knock,
absolutely,
the scraping in the tent thing, like, those are harder to explain away. One, because you can't see them, but like we sit here and tell you how we felt about them, and it's notable that they were just like, our brain goes, "That's different," and I think that says something.
I think you're right, and I think those are the things. That's why I like talking to people with experiences like what you guys had, because I think those are important things to take note of. Because if you pay attention to those things, you may save yourself the potential for something more drastic. If your gut tells you to get out there, like with you and your dad, when the tree fell, your gut told you, get out, grab them and go.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's some people in this world that don't listen to that gut instinct. We're going to be fine.
We were in full on flight mode. Like, we blasted up. We left all of our, we just basically had our guns and we ran. All of our shit was in the tent. Cause the sound of those roots giving way was just it was just crack. And then I saw it starting to go, and I just grabbed him and I was like, go, like full on flight mode. We got the hell out of there. And the other thing, like, Keith and I always haven't hunted together. Keith hasn't always been up with there. So I've sat out in that woods all by myself so many times, and there's an awareness now that we'll have, right? One, Keith, like you said, he was kind of joking about it, and it was very joking, but these things all describe a narrative that you have, and we can't explain them away. I think the bird one is probably the most easiest to, but we definitely had them, and they definitely felt weird. There's no doubt about it. But
like you said, we didn't go out there, like, hey, instead of deer hunting, we're squatching. It was
certainly.
Hey, I'm listening to this podcast, and people, episodes 2 and 3, man, it's just like that resonated with me, and I'm like, it could happen to us. We obviously didn't see anything walking in front of us or anything. I didn't even see one deer, but you know, we had
Well, and
those.
I think it's interesting. It's interesting that you contacted my son, and then he looked up whether or not there was any
I was going to say that, yeah.
reports or activity around there, and
So-
sure enough,
So people are reporting activity up there then? I guess I didn't even ask Keith that.
Yeah, I sent Jake that night, and he went on his I forget what it is, but the Bigfoot tracker app or whatever.
Bigfoot mapping project. Yeah.
What if I guess my curiosity is piquing. What have they said about other experiences up there? Are there anything similar to what we heard?
Well, to be honest, what it is, it's kind of a data collection. All right, so there's a couple of different individuals. One on Facebook has a very large group that he takes Michigan experiences and then posts them on his site. But there's the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, which you can contact. You can fill out the questionnaire as far as, what happened, where it was, what time of day, what the weather conditions were like, what the lighting was like, whether or not it was an auditory, whether or not it was a visual sighting, whether it was you heard a tree knock or whether you heard a howl or a whoop or, it was very specific things. And much like that data collection, the Bigfoot Mapping Project also does that, but the guy Scott Tompkins who runs it, you can get the app for your phone. It's $1.99, I believe. And then when you have the app, you can also access it on your computer. And the app is a handy little thing to have in your pocket because you can look something up really quick and say, oh shit, yeah, there were some sightings in that area. And basically what it'll do, it'll give you a little like a yellow or a green or a red Bigfoot silhouette, or it'll have a footprint. And, those are probably indications of when you click on that, it will tell you a very brief summary of what that sighting was. But if you click on that, it will take you to the actual report that was given to the BFRO or to Scott. And it will tell you, again, weather conditions, time of day, what time of year, what month, what day, what it's all the general data that you would need to take a report, like a police report.
Uh-huh.
So I highly suggest, if you guys have any interest in looking into this stuff, that app, Bigfoot Mapping Project, best $1.99 you're going to spend, especially on, being able to use it on your desktop or your laptop. There's a number of features, and basically I forget what the GSPS is, what he does it for a living. He collects this data, and there's different filters that you can toggle on and off of the maps. And when we did, if you go back maybe 6 months, I did a second episode with him. I would suggest watching it on YouTube because he actually was pulling up his mapping project on the screen, and he was toggling different filters on and off so you could see. And basically what I asked him to do, he was not prepared for this, but I asked him to do this on the Dowagiac area where the Sister Lakes Dewey Lake Monster happened. And so he's got information from the different DNRs throughout the U.S. of the most heavily traveled corridors for animals. And basically what it'll do, it'll draw this brown little squiggly line over the maps, and it will show these corridors that, whether they're tagged animals or whether they're, I'm not sure the process of the collection of the data. But once he had all these pictures drawn around, and he had several of them around Dewey Lake and in the Dowagiac area, the Sister Lakes area, then I asked him to turn on the filter showing the reports. And the 3 or 4 reports from the 1964 sighting of the Dewey Lake Monster, all of them, all 3 or 4 of them ended up landing right on those corridors. that his data points had all suggested where larger animals would be traveling. And I found that very fascinating that, he had no idea. So it wasn't like he could prepare it. It wasn't like he knew that, he was going to be able to show this and this. And in real time during the video, you heard the excitement in his voice that, it's like, holy crap, this it's legitimately showing. So I would suggest, as a really easy to use pocket pal as far as Bigfoot experiences. If you're going, some of my friends who go camping and stuff, they've got them. And, if they're going to pick a camping site, they go to it and they look and see if there's been any sightings. I mean, why not?
Right.
Whether it's you want to experience or whether you want to avoid experiencing it, it's a handy feature. So, yeah. So, you can just click on each one of the sightings and it'll give you a real tiny little blurb about it. And then if you click on that, it'll take you to the actual report and you can read the whole thing.
Right.
So Keith said something earlier today in a message to me that not only did you guys have these experiences, but you had something happen back when you guys were in high school that was a little bit more on the spooky side of things.
Yeah. That one was interesting. I have a little bit more time, but we can walk through this. And it was one of those experiences. It's like, when you have an experience and it slows down and you can still see it. So we were in a friend's minivan, and we may or may not have been sledding behind the minivan, in some country roads. Like, may or may not have been. And we may or may not have encountered a sheriff and decided we were going to go a different direction. And so we were kind of like possibly getting away from this sheriff. And it was winter, and there's several of us in this van, and we were basically slowing down to figure out like what we're going to do next. And there's houses and woods to our left. I can't tell you the direction we were heading, but then there's a body of water to our right. And as we're slowing down, like a 6-foot cloud like walks across the street.
Like the wind picked up.
Looked like it was taking strides, and the hair around your neck, like everybody in the car is just having that experience.
Yeah.
And we just walked it, and it's probably 6:30, 7 o'clock in Michigan, so it's dark out and in the headlights, and you just saw this thing walk across the road.
And you literally saw like legs taking a stride.
It was transparent. Like, if the wind were blowing it, there was no swirling. There was no like real snow happening, but you saw like this form moving is the best way I can explain it. But it was like, I don't want to say it was like human, but it looked like it was walking. Like, it was just like if your mailbox was on the other side of the road and there were no cars, you're just walking over to grab it. Like, that's how the whole thing went. And it was just like the hair on your neck. It felt electrical, and it was just, everybody was like dead ass silent.
Yeah. The whole car just stopped, and we're just like, it happened, it happened probably 3 seconds. And we're all just like, did everybody just fucking see that? And we're like, I believe we all just fucking saw that.
Yeah. And so, the wild thing is like to see it visually, but like the collective experiences, everybody had that like electrical, like, holy shit, silent neck hair just on end. And then everybody was kind of silent, and I don't know who broke it, but like, you just saw that, right? And we're like, I don't know what I saw, but this is what I think I saw. And it was like, Yeah, we went home, but like as far as ghost stories, that is the most real thing or closest thing to a ghost story I would ever say, because I don't think I can be convinced that what we saw wasn't walking across the road.
Yeah.
It was
Wow,
wild.
that's crazy.
It was crazy. So we were, what do you think, Keith? We were maybe like 17, 18, 19 maybe?
Yeah, say I was probably 14, 15 years old for sure.
Yeah. It was wild.
You know, and the great thing about that is it's a cool story, but the great thing is that it was a collective experience.
For sure. So there's probably 5 of us in there, maybe 6.
I bet you if you called up Trevor right now, who's driving the car, we haven't talked about this in 23 years. He'd be like, "Oh yeah," that dude walking across the road would, like, we all were just like, "Fucking A, man, that was something."
Yeah, it was.
Well, I got to thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys putting this together. I know, Tim, you got to get rolling. Keith, I don't know if you noticed back here, but the new addition to my studio shelf back there, thanks to Keith. He heard me talk about my love for the X-Files, the old TV show from the 90s.
The truth is out there.
The next thing I know, my son's bringing me a gift from Keith, so I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. I got a shirt and stickers and a little. I should have worn my little Squatch pin.
The pin.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Appreciate you listening.
And it's fun to tell the story, right, from our perspective, and I hope people enjoy that. But it's also, it's interesting to hear you talk about yours, because it like makes our experience more real and closer to what you're all about with this show.
Yeah.
Because, like you mentioned something a few minutes back about like you didn't have a agenda for this type of topic.
Right.
When we went out there and then we experienced all these things. So we will be listening next time for those, right? If you have them or if you don't. But I'll definitely be listening for those things next time, because we'll do it again, right? We enjoy this activity, but to have all those things happen, all within, hours of each other, that, there isn't a definitive explanation for them, was wild for us. I think.
One thing can be a coincidence, but when you're talking several things in a short span of time, I think there's most likely something more than just coincidence at play there.
Yep.
In it, if people listen to this, they'll probably note like the progression was just more. It went from like not localized to more local, to like the proximity got there, and then it was like right there on us.
Right beside you. Yeah.
Yeah, like
it ramped up. Yep.
So it kept, and I hadn't thought about this till right now, but it was like, you're on the 25, the 15, the 5, and then the end zone. Like that was our progression. Like it finally got to us.
Well, I think
it couldn't have been even more personal. Like it didn't. If we didn't have the tent, whatever may have hit it would have hit Keith, right? I mean, it just was a weird progression. I didn't even think about that till right now.
Or if you guys were not in a shelter, maybe it would have taken on a different form. Maybe it would have been, a rock thrown and, you hear a loud, softball sized rock hit, a couple of feet away from you, something like that. I mean,
yeah.
I think these things, I don't think their intention is to want to really get in and mess you up, but I do think their intention is 100% of the time, scare them, give them a reason to want to leave the area, because
I
think
didn't stick around a lot longer. That was for sure.
You think about what were you doing out there? You were out there with the intention of harvesting food, right?
Yeah.
So if they're living in that same area, you've walked into their living room, you've walked into their kitchen, you've walked into their home, right? You know, that's like a lot of people say, why are they so hard to get trail cam pictures of? Why, you know, well, if somebody were to walk into your home, either one of you, and if I came into your home and you didn't know it, and I had this tiny little picture that was just, you know, 1 by 2 inches, and I put a tiny nail in your wall somewhere and I hung that little picture up, how long do you think it would take before you walked through that house and you found that picture? I bet you'd find it pretty goddamn quick. So if you go in and you put up a man-made piece of plastic that has moving parts in it, smells like different acetones and stuff like that, that's the components of making the plastic housing of a trail cam camera. You've got infrared lights, which a lot of people suspect that these things have the capacity to be able to see infrared light in their spectrum of viewing. We can't see it, but that's not to say they can't, right? There's other animals that see in the infrared spectrum. You know, it's completely natural to our world. There are animals that can see in the infrared spectrum. You know, how many times have you seen a trail cam where a deer is looking straight at the camera as it takes a picture of it?
Right.
You know, something is tipping that animal off that is there. You know, so if they're smart enough, and a lot of people think that they are, they stay away from it.
Yeah, as you said earlier, everything has got a frequency that resonates, right? Maybe they can tune into that.
Yeah, so
I can say
anyway.
I enjoyed I wasn't sure what my experience would be like, but I really enjoyed being able to share our story, and you know, especially that whatever that paranormal experience we had, like that was very real, and like to tell you kind of like feel it again. Which I don't even think we talked about that. Like you said, if we were to call Trevor, but I don't think we've even talked about that for, you know, a couple decades.
Right.
But I can still feel it. I can see it.
It's crazy how stuff like that stays with you. You know, and that's like throughout any of the experiences that I've had through my life, I can close my eyes and I can relive it as it was happening. You know, it's that impactful. It hits you and it sears itself into your brain.
Yeah, and it may have been what, Keith? Maybe like a 6-second interaction in our life, something like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say 3. You know, it's just like
yeah.
You know, and to me that is a testament to the event that happened. You know, you don't take 6 guys who are driving around, screwing off, having fun, sketching behind a van down dirt back roads.
Allegedly.
Possibly even running from law enforcement.
No way.
But, you know, to have something that short of a duration stay with you and have the impact that it did, that you remember it like it was yesterday. And you still feel it resonate when you think back to it. I think those are the things that people need to pay more attention to with the experiences they have in their life. You know, they talk about Occam's razor, and you know, the most likely explanation is the easiest one to come to, right? So if you're having a ghost experience, they go to, you know, it was lighting, or it was smoke and mirrors, or it was this, or it was that, or it was this. To me, Occam's razor would say if you had a ghost experience, then the most logical explanation for it is that you had a ghost experience. And don't try to explain it away.
It was 100% a ghost experience. You know, we all thought it was like, God damn, that was a ghost walking in front of the van. You know, 10 foot in front of the van, right across the street. Yeah.
Crazy. Great story. Hey guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a blast talking to you. Again, thank you for the addition to the studio. Tim, it was a pleasure meeting you. And
nice you,
you guys keep me up to date if you ever run into any more out there in the woods.
Yep. Thanks, Eric.
We'll let you know. We'll definitely have an ear out for it. I know that. And I mean, I assume we'll sit together again. He can't hear and I can hear and see, so I help him out.
All right, gentlemen.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.